Nikon NIKKOR Z 600mm f6.3 VRS lens review. The Nikon 600mm f6.3 VRS, or 600pf as I like to call it, is Nikon's lightweight 600mm lens for wildlife, sports, and long lens landscapes. I recently replaced my f-mount Nikon 500mm f5.6pf lens with it as my main birding lens, and this video will be a comprehensive review based on several months of shooting. The obvious stuff. The 600pf is a high-quality lens. It's very sharp and almost as sharp as the 600mm f4TC. If you want some actual numbers, check out the link in the comments to the Photography Life article with comparisons. Anyway, for most typical birding situations, you'll get a lot of feather detail. For example, here's an uncropped full-frame shot where the bird is fairly small in the frame, and if we zoom in, you can see a good amount of feather detail. Here is another one with the bird a little closer. If you zoom in, you can see an enormous amount of detail. Very nice. I would say that the sharpness in general will please almost everyone. However, lenses like the 600mm f4E or f4Z will probably outperform it, especially if you're going to use teleconverters. That being said, I don't like teleconverters, so I won't comment further on them. It's also pretty light at 1.47 kilos, which is pretty much the same weight as the 500mm f5.6pf lens. So it's much more hand-holdable than the Nikon 180 to 600mm f5.6 to 6.3 VR lens, which comes in at 1.95 kilos. It's also not very physically long when you take off the hood, just 27.8 centimeters. So it's a much more pleasant lens to travel with than the 600mm f4 or the 400mm f2.8, or even the aforementioned zoom. Vibration reduction. The vibration reduction of the 600pf is pretty good. If your camera supports synchro VR, then it's really good. Generally, if a subject is completely still, I can regularly hand-hold shutter speeds of around 1/60th of a second. I'd say it definitely has an advantage over the older Nikon f-mount lenses that don't have synchro VR capability. Here's a video completely handheld, showing what you can achieve with the 600pf. The movement is slight enough that you can easily use software stabilization to make your handheld footage quite stable looking. Unlike some earlier lenses though, there is no VR switch on the lens, which is a bit disappointing in one way, but also minimizes the moving parts, which I suppose is good. Bokeh. A lot of people will wonder about the PF bokeh. In my experience, the bokeh looks very nice. I can only describe it as silky, and I don't have any problems with it. The only time you will see some evidence of PF bokeh is with strong, specular highlights. For example, in this backlit shot of a mallard, you can definitely see the PF lens structure reflected in the bokeh. If you constantly shoot in these sorts of situations, you should think carefully whether it will bother you, and it is one of the few weaknesses of the lens. That being said, if you only encounter this situation rarely, you can soften it a little by hand. For actual bird photography, I rarely encounter situations that make the PF bokeh stand out. Comparison to the 500mm f5.6pf. A lot of Nikon shooters will ask, should I replace the 500mm f5.6pf with the 600mm f6.3pf? That's a tough question. First, the obvious disadvantage is that the 600mm pf is a lot more expensive, especially when you consider the price of some used 500pf lenses. Also, the 500pf is pretty much as sharp as the 600pf, so in a lot of ways, the 500pf makes a lot more sense, even if you plan to use it with an FTZ adapter. And there's another advantage of the 500pf, its minimum focus distance of 3 meters. The 600pf has an MFD of 4 meters, which is 1 extra meter. In a few cases, I have found that to be a bit problematic, but those cases are rare. Still, this translates into a magnification of 0.18x for the 500pf and only 0.15 for the 600pf. So, if you're also going to use your lens to shoot lizards or smaller birds that are very close, the 500pf can actually be the better lens. The 600pf does have 4 advantages over the 500pf. The first is that it's 600mm, obviously, and 600mm versus 500mm is a 1.2 crop factor. Here's a shot with the 500pf, uncropped, and this is what the crop would be with the 600pf. Approximately, of course, because I'm not taking into account the focus breathing differences. But in any case, a 1.2 crop factor is significant, and that will give you a bit of extra detail. The second advantage is the synchro VR feature of the 600pf. You can feel it's definitely a bit easier to handhold the 600pf compared to the 500pf. You can get slightly lower shutter speeds and more stable video. That being said, my general feeling is that the difference is probably about a half a stop to one stop. The 500 PF is pretty good, so I wouldn't say this is a huge advantage. The third advantage is that the 600 PF works a little bit better with the Nikon Z system, as it is a native lens, so it focuses a bit more smoothly. I've noticed that the 500 PF occasionally jerks in a weird subtle way, but then again, this is a minor thing. But the 600 PF does feel native and a bit more smooth for sure. And the final advantage of the 600 PF over the 500 PF is that it has more lens controls. It has the control ring, which is really nice, especially when you program it to adjust exposure compensation. And also, the 600 PF has a second lens button, which is quite useful for switching autofocus modes. Is all of that worth it for the higher price of the 600 PF? Personally, I think it is if you get the 600 PF on sale or used. If you get it at full price, I do think it's a bit overpriced compared to the outstanding value of the 500 PF. All in all, I think you can't go wrong with either lens, and both are capable of truly outstanding images. Conclusion. If you're the kind of bird photographer that wants a lightweight, portable, and travel-friendly 600mm solution for the Nikon Z mount, then the 600mm f6.3 VRS lens is the best option, especially if you're demanding with sharpness. It can easily be carried all day and used without a tripod, and its great stabilization means it will get you the shot again and again. Of course, the 600 PF is not a perfect lens. Its PF bokeh will appear in a rare shot, and I would have definitely preferred a minimum focus distance closer to 3 meters rather than 4 meters. But I'll forgive that, because otherwise, it's pretty much an ideal lens for my style of photography. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again next time.